Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fight or Flight. Today I'll take you through the cold and dark startup procedure for PMDG's Boeing 747 Queen of the Skies 2. I've already generated a flight plan in PFPX for a short flight between Denver International and Phoenix Sky Harbor. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more like this in future. Now let's jump straight into the flight deck and get started. The first thing to do is enter the fuel quantity and payload zero fuel weight from the operational flight plan I printed from PFPX. We'll use the lower CDU for all simulator related actions. As the aircraft is completely powered down, you can click and hold the menu button on the CDU to access it. Our release fuel today is 37,991 pounds. Our zero fuel weight is 466,567 pounds, and we'll round that up and enter this into the CDU as 466.6. Now we're ready for the initial cockpit setup. In the real world, the pilot would check the hull number and the circuit breakers on the upper overhead. This isn't a concern for us, so we'll get straight into powering up the aircraft. We'll move to the main overhead left panel and switch the battery on and close the guard. Set standby power to auto and check the bus ties are auto and the hydraulic demand pump selectors are off. Move down to the forward instrument panel. Check the alternate flap selector is off, the landing gear handle is down, and check that the flap lever position matches the position shown on the upper ICAS. Now we have the option of connecting external ground power or starting the APU. For simplicity, we'll use the APU. Right-click the selector to on, then right-click again and hold for a second before releasing. We'll have to wait for a minute while the generators come online. When the avail lights come on, we can push the switches to select APU power. We'll turn the nav lights on to signal to the ground crew that the aircraft is powered up. Now we'll set all the IRS selectors to nav. The initial cockpit setup is now complete. At this point, your first officer will begin the exterior walk around, and we can start with the CDU pre-flight. Check the ident page on the CDU to confirm everything matches up, and then move to the pause init page. We'll take the GPS left position from page 3 and enter that into the current IRS position. In the route page, select Denver as the origin and Phoenix as the destination. I exported the route earlier from PFPX, so I can click Send to simulate loading a company route. After a few seconds, you can load the route into the FMC. When the CDU message disappears, the route has been loaded successfully. Go to the departure and arrivals page and select the SID that we chose earlier. We're taking off from runway 25 on the Pikes 9 departure with the Alamosa transition. We'll be landing in Phoenix on runway 26. Select the ILS 26, Eagle 6 arrival, and the Gallup transition. We can now check the route on the navigation display. Select the plan mode on the efus and increase the range. We can now step through the route on the legs page to check for any discontinuities. When you're happy with the route, select the efus mode to map and the range back to 10. Go back to the route page on the CDU and activate the route, then execute. Active Sky has automatically generated winds aloft data for us, and the CDU message indicates that we can load this data to the FMC. Go to the FMC comms page and click the route data LSK. Load the wind data and then execute. We'll also receive descent forecast data. Load this via FMC comms and descent forecast. Then click load. No need to execute this time. Now we'll enter our performance data. Click the zero fuel weight LSK twice to load the zero fuel weight. Reserve fuel for this trip is 7.7 and cost index is 100. Cruise altitude is flight level 400. Now we'll enter the thrust limits. TopCat gave us a takeoff 2 derated takeoff with an assumed temperature of 54 degrees. As you can see, the climb 2 derate has been automatically armed. In the takeoff ref page, we'll enter 10 for flaps and click twice on the center of gravity LSK and wait for the takeoff trim to update. When the IRSs have aligned as they have here, we'll be able to load our V-speeds into the FMC. Now that the CDU pre-flight is complete, the first officer should be back from the walk-around and they can verify the information you just entered. In the meantime, we can continue with the captain's cockpit preparation. Let's go back up to the left overhead panel. EECs are normal, left and right utility lights are on, and the standby power is auto. Generator control is on, and the gen drive disconnect switches are guarded. The hydraulic system fault and pump pressure lights should be on, demand selectors off, and finally the engine pump switches should all be on. We'll now move across the bottom edge of the overhead from left to right and set any lighting as desired. For the purposes of this video, I'll turn on the glare shield floodlights and the dome light. We'll leave the center light panel as it is and double check that the nav light is on as the aircraft is powered. We'll right click and hold the indicator lights test switch and take a quick look around the cockpit to make sure everything is lit up. Go back to the switch and left click once to turn it out of the test position. We'll now check the ICAS engine page. Oil quantity should be more than 18 quarts. Now click the stat page and check that the hydraulic fluid quantity is more than 0.74 and the passenger and crew oxygen pressure is more than 1650 psi. Now we'll perform the fire overheat test. We'll open the upper ICAS page to see the fire test messages. Click and hold the fire overheat button, an alarm will sound and you'll see various warning lights and the test in progress message. When the fire test pass message displays on the upper ICAS page, we can release the test button and close the window. Arm the emergency lights and close the guard. Observer audio is normal, interphone is off, and the fuel transfer main 1 and 4 is off. Don't confuse this with the fuel crossfeed buttons on the fuel panel. We'll talk about those later. The engine fire and APU handles should be in the in position with no lights. The cargo fire panel should also display no lights. Engine start switches are all in, standby ignition normal, continuous ignition is off, and we can leave the auto ignition switch on both. In the real world, you'd select the auto ignition switch to 1 for odd numbered flights and 2 for even numbered flights. This is done to save wear and tear on the ignition switches. Fuel jettison selector switch is off together with both left and right nozzles. On the fuel panel, all boost pumps are off, anti-ice is set to auto, both wipers are off, and both window heat switches are on. Next, we'll make our way up the right hand column. Engine bleed air is on with no sysfault lights. APU bleed is on with no valve light. Left and right isolation switches are both on, as we can see from the illuminated flow bar. We know from the METAR that the outside air temperature is below 20 degrees, so we'll turn one pack to normal. Above 20 degrees, we turn two packs to normal. Equipment cooling is normal, high flow and pack reset are off, and the gasper is on. The gaspers are those small adjustable air outlets above the passenger seats. Alt zone reset is off, upper and lower recirculation fans are on, aft cargo heat is off, and passenger and flight deck temperature are both auto. Now the pressurization panel. We can confirm that the landing altitude is set to auto by taking a look at the upper ICAS page. Pushing the switch on the panel toggles this between manual and auto. Auto uses the data from the FMC, so you'll generally want to keep this set to auto. However, the 747 FCOM states that if your destination airport elevation is between 8,000 and 10,000 feet, you should set this to manual and dial in 8,000 feet. Then, before the descent, set it back to auto. The manual outflow valve selectors are both off, and the valve indicators are pointing to open. Finally, the passenger oxygen switch is guarded, and the upper and lower yaw dampers are on. We'll now head down to the glare shield and make our way from left to right. Set your lighting options as desired, then move on to the efus control unit. Here is where we set the various modes for the primary flight display and the navigation display. Set the mode to map and the range selector between 10 and 40 for departure. The various toggle switches and radio navigation aid switches can be set as desired. Now would be a good time to listen to the ATIS at Denver. Head down to the radio panel and dial in the ATIS frequency from the chart. Don't forget to activate the channel to listen to it.
Denver Airport Information, India, 1324, Zulu, wind 231 at 10, visibility greater than 20 miles, sky condition clear, temperature 17.2.5, altimeter 3025, ILS.
We'll enter the current QNH using the barrow selector.
Landing and departing, runway 26 against runway 25. View for aircraft stay directional.
Moving on to the MCP, turn both flight directors on. Some pilots leave the autothrottle off until entering the runway, but we'll leave it on armed here. We'll also go ahead and arm LNAV and VNAV. IAS max selector is set to V2 speed. Set the heading selector to the takeoff runway heading. You'd set the altitude selector to your initial cleared altitude or the first restriction on the SID. We're not using ATC today, so we'll set our cruise altitude of flight level 400. Finally, double check the autopilot disengage bar is up. Now we'll do a quick oxygen test and scan left to right under the glare shield. Set all your instrument sources and CRT selectors as required. Alternate gear extend switches and ground proximity switches should all be off with no lights. Speed brake is down, throttles are closed, and thrust reverse levers are down. Fuel control switches are cut off, and stabilizer trim cutouts are set to auto. At the back of the pedestal, we'll turn the no smoking signs to on and the seatbelt signs to auto. Aileron and rudder trim should be 0 and set the auto brake to RTO. We'll quickly run the transponder test by clicking the test button and looking at the screens.
TCAS test. Pass.
We'll carry out the weather radar test too.
Monitor radar display. Go around. Wind shear ahead. Wind shear ahead. Wind shear ahead.
Now let's quickly talk about the fuel panel. We can see from the ICAS display that we have just under 38,000 pounds of fuel on board. Only the main tanks contain fuel. Tank 2 contains slightly less fuel as the aft tank is supplying fuel to the APU. Basically, we can follow a rule that some pilots call the 120k rule. If we have less than 120,000 pounds of fuel on board, we need to turn on all main tank pumps and close the 1 and 4 crossfeeds. That's what we'll do now. Turn on all main tank pumps and close the 1 and 4 crossfeeds. If we have more than 120,000 pounds of fuel, turn on all pumps for tanks that contain fuel, turn on the override pumps and open the 1 and 4 crossfeeds. These two situations cover the whole range of fuel loads from full to minimum fuel. If you have the original fuel system installed via the PMDG equipment settings, you'll have to manage this panel in flight. Now we're ready for pushback. Close the doors in FS actions and arm them. We're now going to set the hydraulic demand pump selectors. I'll open the ICAS page so you can see the various systems come online. First, set number 4 to aux, as this provides hydraulic power for the parking brake. Then set 1, 2 and 3 to auto. We'll make sure that only one pack is on for engine start, which it is, and set the parking brake. Now we'd perform the pre-flight checklist, get clearance from ATC, and go over the departure brief with the first officer. This part is important. We need to make sure we have power once we remove the chocks and begin the pushback. The APU is supplying power at the moment, but if we were running on ground power before this point, we'd need to start the APU and select it before we disconnect the ground power. We'll turn the beacon to both and remove the chocks, which would automatically disconnect the ground power if it was connected. Here we perform the before start checklist, and when that's complete, we can call GSX to perform the pushback.
And ground to cockpit, we're ready for pushback. Locking gear. Departure check completed, Captain. Bypass pin inserted. And release parking brake, sir. Commencing the push, Captain. Start engines at your discretion.
Once the parking brake is released and the pushback begins, we'll start the engines. We'll do 4 and 3 together, then 2 and 1. Make sure your ICAS is set to engines so we can monitor the startup. Pull the start switches for engines 4 and 3, then set the fuel control levers 4 and 3 to run. When the engines have started to stabilise, you'll hear the click of the start switches returning to their in position. Repeat the procedure for engines 2 and 1.
And set parking brakes, please. Unlocking gear. Captain, the tow truck is disconnected and the bypass pin is removed. Left and right both clear.
With the parking brake set, we can switch off the APU, set the number 4 hydraulic pump to auto, turn the aft cargo heat on together with all the packs, hit the recall button on the iCast to make sure there are no hidden messages for us. We'll set the flaps to our takeoff configuration of 10. While the flaps are extending, we can check the flight controls are all functioning on the stat page. Now we'll clear the lower iCast display and set the stabilizer trim to the value on the takeoff ref page. At this point, we'll complete the before taxi checklist and then set the transponder to TARA. Turn off all the flight deck lighting we had on earlier. Taxi light on, check we're clear on the left, and finally release the parking brake and begin taxiing to the runway. Now we're at the end of the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned 1 or 2 things along the way. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have any suggestions for future videos, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you next time.